Okay, so we are at the stage where certain governments around the world are now attempting to have a conditional reopening of society. And what that is going to do is make some people believe that the worst is over. It's almost like giving false reassurance to the people so that they rest a bit easier and increase their level of confidence in the government. Whichever way this plays out, I just recommend folks, whatever you do, protect yourselves. If you have masks, gloves, and disinfectant, use them. I mean, if you're a prepper, that's what the gear is for situations like this. You should be suited and booted up. How can you call yourself a prepper and then when something happens, you act like it's not happening? How's that work? The human condition. Well, it looks like we are going to have another condition to deal with. It is an issue that is likely to become very apparent very soon, within a very short period of time, and those are alterations in our food supply. You know, there was an article published by The Guardian. Millions of farm animals culled as U.S. food supply chain chokes up. COVID-related slaughterhouse shutdowns in the U.S. are leading to fears of meat shortages and price rises, while farmers are being forced to consider depopulating their animals. At least 2 million animals have already reportedly been culled on farm, and that number is expected to rise. Approved methods for slaughtering poultry include slow suffocation by covering them with foam, or by shutting off the ventilation into the barns. Foaming means covering hens with a layer of foam that blocks their airways, gradually suffocating them over several minutes. Ventilation shutdown, meanwhile, although described by the AVMA as not preferred, is one of the cruelest, but cheapest options, said Garcias. Shutting down broiler chicken house ventilation systems means animals die of organ failure due to overheating as temperatures quickly rise. On Sunday, Tyson chairman John Tyson warned in a blog post that, in addition to meat shortages, this is a serious food waste issue. Farmers across the nation simply will not have anywhere to sell their livestock to be processed when they could have fed the nation. Millions of animals, chickens, pigs, and cattle will be depopulated because of the closure of our processing facilities. The food supply chain is breaking. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we have a bit of an issue. And this is only a portion of the problem. So I want to discuss what's going on with the global food supply. It is something we must consider as we move forward in this event. Changes are coming, and many of those changes come with regulations and restrictive control. Effects from disturbances in the food supply chain tend to creep up on you until you become aware of the shortage. Food shortages? Yeah, that's called famine. I think what's important to understand about our food supply is the form, quantity, and quality of the food we are purchasing and eating, and the food supply chain. In this food supply chain, there is production, processing, there's distribution, and then there is consumption and disposal. And this supply chain starts on the farm and ends on our plates. Now keep in mind, this supply chain flows in only two directions. The food goes from the farm to the consumer in one direction, and money goes from the consumer back to the farm in the other direction. And because it's a chain, If there is one disturbance in the force, you'll see the chain get rattled. Another thing to consider is the movement of the product and money are dependent upon the push and pull of the producer or farmer and the consumer. The farm pushes out food because it has an expiration date. They have to. And so by the time it gets to the consumer pulls in the demand for the product or food and then pushes money in the other direction. If for some reason the consumer is lacking in the pull and push game, the producer has to work that much harder to keep the chain from breaking. So think about this. Right now, there are about 2 million farms that are normally in operation in the U.S. That may seem like quite a few, but it was more like 7 million back in the 1930s. The number of workers in the agricultural industry also went down, to the point where there are only 1.3% of workers in the U.S. that are in agriculture, which is actually around 2 million agricultural workers. Now that you have some idea of how many farmers we are dealing with here, you can see how disruptions in the farm to fork food supply chain are not really affordable. So since the outbreak, we have had a significant pull of money from the food service industry. Restaurants and many places that serve food are not. And so farmers feel the pull of money from that. At the same time, there are disruptions in the logistics and distribution. So now farmers are also having a hard time getting their products out. Farmers that raise livestock, dairy farmers, are truly facing a horrible outcome in the fact that it's become difficult to move their animals to slaughter. There was an article in the Detroit Free Press. COVID-19 brings uncertainty for farmers and food suppliers. From lost markets to growers who don't know whether they have a buyer for the fall vegetables they're planting now, to farmers ready to harvest but not knowing whether enough migrant workers will be coming to pick the crops. The coronavirus pandemic is cutting a wide swath of hardship across agriculture. Michigan's third biggest economic sector after manufacturing and tourism. Coronavirus impacts are a more immediately acute problem for pork farmers because of the nature of hog raising compared with other meats. Chickens raised for meat take only about 8 to 12 weeks before going to slaughter, giving producers more flexibility to make changes. Beef cattle take a year and a half, but producers typically have more flexibility to hold cows on their farms than pork producers do. A sow is pregnant with her litter for about 4 months. The baby pigs take about 3 weeks for weaning off their mother's milk, and then a young pig takes about 6 months to reach slaughtering age. It's a problem facing beef and poultry farmers too, said IMDAR Director Gary McDowell. Gary McDowell, Director of the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. You're going to have to dispose of these animals, one way or another, he said. If the slaughterhouse can't take them, the farmer can't continue to hold on to the animals they can't sell. We're not there yet, but it could be fairly soon. It could really become a problem. And what this means is that farmers raising livestock have been in some cases forced to cull the livestock because they simply can't get their animals to slaughter and processed. They can't afford to feed the animals over an extended period of time, and some animals, if they are not slaughtered in a certain period of time, they just die because they are engineered and bred to grow fast and have a very short lifespan. Animals are just being disposed of. It's not like they are being fed to people, no. Farmers aren't releasing animals into the wild. Goodbye, cows. You're free to roam. See you later. No. Meat production is down at around 30%. Think about what's going on in the dairy industry. Ken Nobis of St. John's Dairy Farm says, you can't turn that cow off. Like you can shut a factory off if you have to. Turn out the lights, lock the doors, walk away, come back, open the factory back up and start again, Nobis said. That cow has to be milked twice a day. You have to keep feeding her. And this, according to the article, is causing some farmers to have to dump tens of thousands of gallons of milk down the drain every day. What about veggie farmers? How are they handling this? Matt DeBlau of Mike Perrone Produce states, what they want are the core items, the potatoes, things that will last, that people can store and will eat every day, he said. The scary part is the future. What's going to happen in coming months? The retail side. They're scared about setting up contracts, telling farmers they will commit to taking their products. I bought seed 2 months ago, he said. I'm going to be putting stuff into the ground next week into next month. And I don't know whether there's going to be a market for it come late summer and fall. And these are just a few examples of what is happening all across the country. And what this does, it exposes the weakness within the supply chain and issues they need to address now for the future. See, before, about half of the food consumption here in the U.S. was done at restaurants, cafes, food service venues near work or school. Today, more people are buying food to take home and prepare. Now, when you have that type of shift, more people are going to start buying food. More people are going to start buying food from other places, namely conventional grocery stores. And so now the food demand is now coming from another direction. Professor William Masters, who teaches food economics at the Friedman School, says that our supply chain is not really like a chain, but more like a mesh. In other words, when something within the system fails, there are always ways to fill in the gap. It's a problem when you have multiple facility shutdowns in multiple states, and when you have border closures and a virus that stops migrant workers from harvesting fruits and vegetables in multiple locations. Now that you have this demand in the grocery store and not in restaurants, cafeterias, cafes, meat packing plants, dairy, and other sectors of agriculture are having to struggle in order to make the switch from bulk deliveries to those venues to retail grocery. Not to mention that many people have now a loss of income and can't afford to purchase a lot of the foods they would normally buy. Farmers are seeing a drop in income, so much so that they need bailout money. I think the Trump administration plans to provide $19 billion in relief to farmers and food banks. Farmers markets have been deemed essential. Many are looking into other methods of moving their products, such as using home delivery. Some states are encouraging purchasing from your local producers and investing in community-supported agriculture. The problem for farmers is they don't know what's going to happen a few months down the line and are debating whether or not if they should bother even planting or growing certain crops. This is where we are at right now with our food supply, and we still have to get through the growing season. And we are not really sure how the climate is going to affect the farms yet. It's tricky. We could be in trouble in a few months. Which is why it's important to pay attention and address these issues now before it becomes a major issue for those consumers who have no access to food except through their local grocer. If you haven't noticed, one of the things that governments like to do is they like to take advantage of opportunities that arise as a result of some event. The changes and shifts are usually political and economical. However, the driving force, the motivation, the influence comes from something behind them, the dark side. And so when you see that they now have an opportunity to make needed changes in the logistics, production, and retailing of our food supply, you start thinking back. You start thinking, the Impossible Whopper, Beyond Meat. You start thinking, fake lab-made lettuce. You start thinking 3D printed fruit. You start thinking lab-made meat. You think about the marketing push for these products. You think about the push for sustainability. You think about the push for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, vehicle automation. The government's bailing out farmers. It seems almost like selling a bit of control over to them. Now, I don't want to disturb anyone, but I feel the need to point this out. And besides, I think you should know and understand this. Keep in mind, this is nothing more than a theory. Where I think we are headed is an era where we used to look at as science fiction. Certain fruits and vegetables will start to disappear. Certain meats will start to disappear, all replaced by some type of lab-made alternative. Yes, something like Soylent Green. Because let me point something out to you all. Without animal manure, you can grow veggies with plant-based fertilizer. However, there are only a few people who know how to make that type of compost and successfully grow crops in it. So that option right now is extremely limited. Also, I want to point something out that many people don't realize. Farm animals are not the only animals being culled. I want you to take a look at something. And this comes from the Apache Junction and Gold News, the only hometown paper. The headline reads, Trump FY21 budget proposes increase in wild horse roundups and sterilization, omits slaughter. The American Wild Horse Campaign today expressed alarm at the president's budget for the fiscal year 2021, issued today, which seeks a 15% budget increase for the Bureau of Land Management's Wild Horse and Burro program. We appreciate the administration's recognition that slaughter of America's wild horses and burros, the lethal option we have long worked to oppose, is unacceptable to the Congress and the American public, said Susan Roy, executive director of the American Wild Horse Campaign. However, Congress just increased the BLM's budget by 25%, and now the administration is asking it to throw even more money at a mass roundup, stockpiling, and inhumane sterilization plan that has no scientific basis or public support. So apparently, folks, there are horses running wild all over the place. It's Planet of the Horses, and they must be stopped. I mean, are you kidding me? Why are they culling wild horses? Sterilization, yeah, that's a great idea. And it doesn't stop there, ladies and gentlemen. There are all types of wild animals being culled by different governments around the world. Kangaroos, chickens, hogs, deer. You'll notice the culling are all animals we eat, by the way. You know what it reminds me of? The late 1800s. How many of you have heard of Buffalo Bill Cody? Cody was a legend of the frontier era, part myth conjured in dime novels. The men from New York had expected to find him as a desperado of the West, bristling with knives and pistols. But they did not. Cody was loquacious and friendly, an expert hunter. He knew that with the wind blowing from behind, the men risked their scent being carried to the animals and scaring them away. Then again, a buffalo is a lumbering, hirsute cow, and men were outfitted with some of the quickest horses and held the best guns owned by the U.S. Army, which was outfitting the hunting expedition. The Army wasn't in the business of guiding hunting trips for soft-skinned Wall Streeters, but it was in the business of controlling the Native Americans in that area. And that meant killing buffalo. One colonel, 4 years earlier, had told a wealthy hunter who felt a shiver of guilt after he shot 30 bulls in one trip. Kill every buffalo you can. Every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. That comes from an article in The Atlantic. Make certain that you all remain aware of what is going on with the animal kingdom as we speak, folks. We have to be very cautious of what we accept into our lives from this point forward, so that we don't end up getting trapped into something. We are what we eat. Let's just pray we don't end up eating what we are. Until next time, friends, stay awake, stay aware, stay safe and well fed. And I'll talk to you all soon.